Welcome back. This could be one of the most competitive races for governor in years. Thanks to President Trump, Democrats are motivated like perhaps never before. And with a week to go, several candidates, including Gwen Graham, Philip Levine, Andrew Gillum, are within points of each other in the latest poll. On the Republican side, wow. Adam Putnam has been running for governor for what seems like his entire adult life. But he was late for the Trump train, and Ron DeSantis was all aboard, and as a result, the president gave the nod to him, and the base seems to have followed. Joining us for more are Joe Greeters, the chairman of the Sarasota Republican Party, former state representative Keith Fitzgerald, and Jacob Ogles, the political editor of SRQ magazine. So Joe, let me start with you. I know in your position you can't take sides there, but what are you seeing? Because the polling, especially after the president was here and endorsed Ron DeSantis, showed the congressman jumping out to a considerable lead, and now there's some polling that shows that Putnam is catching up again.
Well, it shows you how powerful the president is with his endorsement. And I think when the president came, I think Ron DeSantis opened up a 20-point lead. And most people probably didn't even know who Ron DeSantis was. He's a conservative congressman from Northeast Florida. He's done a good job, and he's on Fox News all the time defending the president, does a great job. And here you have, he's running against Adam Putnam, who's been Florida's local guy and you're right, he's been running his entire adult life, the last 20-something years, and he's never really made any mistake. He's a great candidate, and now the polls show it's somewhat even. I don't know if I believe it because it's one poll, but it's Adam Putnam has a lot of support, but Ron DeSantis has a lot of support.
So what do? Do you get the president to try to come back?
I think if I'm Ron DeSantis, I'd try to do everything I can to get him to come back, or try to at least tweet out a couple more times, or give him a shout out on TV one time. And I think if you're Adam Putnam, you're doing everything you possibly can. Your whole career is on the line. What do? You have to have all your friends, anybody who knows the president, try to talk to him and say, please don't come back, because if he comes back, I'm toast.
Jacob, you know, I've had a lot of local Republicans, I won't name names, who have really kind of not appreciated the president inserting himself into a Republican primary. They've been on board with Adam Putnam for a long time, and but the base does not necessarily agree. They're listening to what the president says.
Well, if you look at polls, about 80% of registered Republicans strongly approve of the president right now. So you really are seeing, and you've seen it in primaries all across the country, the bench for the Republican Party getting remade sort of in Trump's image. Now, I think the question of whether that's going to endure is going to depend on Republican Party's success in November. And we'll see. I mean, if DeSantis becomes the nominee but doesn't deliver in November, then it might cause a lot of backlash. But then again, this could all validate and pan out in the end.
We have less than a minute here, but I mean, I have had a number of Republicans come up to me and say, if DeSantis is the nominee and Gwen is the nominee on the Democratic side, you might have your first Democratic governor in 20 years.
I think that Ron DeSantis is not as good a general election candidate as Adam Putnam, but that doesn't mean that he's destined to lose the general election. We're going to have to see what happens.
Okay, we're going to discuss this much more in a moment. Welcome back. We are talking about the governor's race, and joining us for more are Joe Greeters, the chairman of the Sarasota Republican Party, former state representative Keith Fitzgerald, and Jacob Ogles, the political editor of the SRQ magazine. Let's talk about the Democratic side for a bit. And our friend Peter Schorsch at Florida Politics wrote something this way today. With 8 days before the election day in the race for the Democratic nomination for Florida, 3 candidates, including a surging Andrew Gillum, are separated by just 6 points. Keith, we should disclose you're actually helping Mayor Levine of Miami Beach, but still that is pretty incredible.
Yeah, and it's a close race, and I know people within various different campaigns, so I can tell you that everybody is biting their nails. It's a tough race. I think Philip Levine is probably stuck a nose out in front, but it is a nose, and we have a lot of undecided voters to go.
It depends who you talk to, but Jacob, let me ask you, what's happened here? Because it seems over the last couple of weeks, Gwen Graham really kind of built out a lead. Now you had Jeff Green, the billionaire from West Palm Beach, come into the race, launch a lot of negative ads.
Yes.
And, you know, Philip Levine was kind of, was a little bit written off for dead a couple of weeks ago because he sank behind them. What's happened?
I think Jeff Green is the story of this race in a lot of ways. He came in, he's a South Florida billionaire. He started to cut into Levine's base just because of that. But then when he went so negative on Graham, it cost Graham some points. On the flip side, though, his name has been attached to every one of those smear campaigns that he's put on. That may work in a two-person primary, but when you've got a five-man field, to go that negative, some of that stink's going to rub off on you. So Green is sunk in the polls, even as he's taking Graham down with him.
And Keith, in terms of Mayor Levine's situation, at least after that happened, he still had the money, because he is a wealthy man himself, to stay on television and keep that message of his going.
Yeah, and he has a very fulsome campaign, so he's grinding things out in a very professional way. They've knocked on 250,000 doors, and they have 150 people in 14 different field staff, so I think it's a very solid campaign. I don't think he really fell back that far, but I think otherwise you're absolutely right. That Green has just fallen back. He's finished, just like in a horse race. And Andrew Gillum, I'm a big fan of him, but he cannot get to the finish line.
Well, let me ask you, Jacob, because Mayor Gillum has got, Bernie Sanders was in Florida last week for him. There seems to be a lot of outside money that is for Gillum, and this says he actually is closing.
Well, the liberal wing of the party has started to consolidate around Gillum. The question is this all too little too late? Because, a week ago, he was still polling at around 11. I don't know that he can actually carve in or get that many undecided voters, especially considering he represents such a ideological extreme of the party.
And we're going to talk about more of that in just a moment. We are just getting warmed up on our conversation on the race for governor. We'll continue right after a quick break, so stay with us. Welcome back. We are talking about the governor's race, and joining us for more are Joe Gruters, the chairman of the Sarasota Republican Party, former state representative Keith Fitzgerald, and Jacob Ogles, the political editor of SRQ magazine. And Jacob, let me start with you this time, because this is what you hear, that the Democrats, because of the anti-Trump sentiment, how motivated the Democrats are, may well have the best chances in years to win the governor's mansion. Traditionally, over at least the last 8 years, the Democrats don't do that well in the midterms, but is this the year that might change?
Well, two things. One, every year seems to be the year that the Democrats have the best shot at the governor's mansion until they lose it. So we'll see what happens there. The last two midterms were when Obama was in the White House, and just naturally, you always see people turning out from the opposition party of the president with some passion in the midterms. Trump certainly elicits a lot more passion even than normal among the opposition party. So yes, I think there's a strong chance that you're going to see much better Democratic turnout this year.
Let me throw that at you, because there is a difference between here on the Sun Coast, which you have more Republican voters, and statewide, where there are more Democratic voters. So is it the issue of who is in the White House now, and that you have to prepare yourself, at least on a statewide basis, that you have a motivated Democratic electorate out there?
I think the Democrat base is certainly motivated. You can see, just look at the Sarasota results right now. They're winning the absentee ballots. The Republicans are winning in early voting, but it's not nearly enough to make up that gap from the absentee ballot advantage that they have. In November, I think it's going to come down to who ends up being our nominees, and I think it's going to be how exciting these candidates are. I personally hope that Gwen Graham is the Democrat nominee, because I think that she lacks the real charisma and enthusiasm, and I think that as a result, our candidates and our the base will be more motivated to go out and vote.
But Joe, I'll say it again. I have talked to a lot of your colleagues who have said that if Gwen Graham is the Democratic nominee and DeSantis is the Republican nominee, they may well think that a Democrat could actually win this year.
And they did this. They said the same thing when people were wondering if Donald Trump was going to win our nomination and ended up being our nominee for president. I think that Ron DeSantis will do a great job of motivating the base if he is our nominee. I think that people underestimate him, but I think that once he's let go, I think there's a lot of room for him to continue to grow, and I think people will rally behind him, because ultimately, in your opening, you said it right. There's 4,000 positions that are decided as a result of who wins the governor's race. Every one of these judicial appointees are being picked by the governor that come up. all the university boards, it's incredible the power and the reach that the governor has. It's so important. So I think our base will be motivated because we understand. And on top of that, they said whoever controls the governor's mansion has potentially a 2-point advantage in the presidential race. And when Florida could be the key state in the 2020 election, I think we're going to do all we can to make sure we win.
Keith, I would imagine that you would actually agree with a lot of what Joe just said.
Well, I agree with a lot of it. I think also Levine will do well as well because he is a business guy as well as somebody with public experience. He is not an extremist. He's actually a pragmatist. So I think that, DeSantis would be a gift for the Democrats, and I think the Republicans know that. And as far as the motivation is concerned, it is true that these appointments are important, but you don't really motivate the base because of who they're appointing to the bog. On the other hand, the Democrats have Donald Trump and Ron DeSantis. That's going to motivate their people.
But what about to Joe's point or to actually Jacob's point that Democrats have been saying this for years, that this is the year, and it really has not turned out that way? Why is, as they say on Passover, why is this night different than any other night?
Yeah, well, let's not break out the wine, but yeah, so first of all, you have to look at each one of those races. If you go back to the last several years, I think 7 statewide elections, the difference between the two parties is 50,000 votes. So these are really close elections, and then you have to look at each one. Particularly, 2010 was an awful year for Democrats across the country. If you look at the dynamics of that, it sets up very similarly, except this time to the Democrats' advantage.
So and Scott only won by, remind me, something like 60,000 votes?
Yes.
In a bad year.
In a bad year. And yeah, and it's a very similar kind of a candidate. I think correctly perceived as a radical and extremist. The Democrats are likely to put up Levine or Graham, a moderate. I think it's a bad deal for the Republicans.
Jacob, how engaged are voters in this race right now? Because there's a lot going on, basically in our national conversation, and then also locally. We have the U.S. Senate race. We have a lot of congressional races. Have voters yet started focusing on who they want from either party?
I think a lot of it's going to change at the end of the night next Tuesday. I think there are a lot of voters who are really not interested in getting into the personality wars that come with the primaries and are going to start really actively engaging in this race after nominees are set. And, I did want to mention, because he mentioned Levine being a pragmatic candidate, the two frontrunners on the Democratic side are both very much moderate pragmatists who are trying to sell practical effects. Gwen Graham's message is, we haven't won in 20 years, elect me because I've won in a red district.
Does that necessarily motivate the progressives in the party who are fired up, but want somebody finally to start, promoting their issues?
I think it's a question of, do they need to be fired up? I think what you're going to have Democrats doing is running on the advantage of already having a president that's got their blood boiling in the base, and then having somebody run with a practical message to balance that out and say cooler heads can still win while our blood is hot.
Okay, let me ask you all an interesting question. When it comes to the Suncoast, which candidates have worked the hardest to win the vote in the governor's race of voters on the Suncoast, starting with the Republican candidates, Joe?
Well, I'll say there's no question Adam Putnam. He's probably been here 10 times as our speaker over the 10 years that I've been chairman. And one other thing about the advantage the Republicans have in November, we have 1,000 people a day moving here from other states, mainly high-tax states, and the track record of the conservative leadership in Tallahassee, we have the lowest bond rating in the country. We are the best place to do business. We have the best higher education. Across the board, Republican leadership has done amazing things over the last 10 years, and you can debate that, but at the end of the day, the numbers are the numbers, and I think that will lead us to victory no matter what happens.
All right, let me give Keith a chance to respond to that. Is it true that, for everybody who's retiring to Florida, they're all going to vote Republican, Keith?
I don't think the numbers really bear out that it's a huge advantage. The high tax thing, okay, so people who have a lot of accumulated wealth may lean Republican, but we're pulling people in across the board. We're doing pretty well economically. I don't think that that's necessarily true. And the other thing is, if you just look at registrations, we're doing pretty well.
And let me ask you the same question I asked Joe in terms of who has worked the hardest to win Democrats on the Suncoast. Obviously you're working with Mayor Levine there, but you've seen the entire picture.
Right, and I mainly do the policy stuff, so I haven't been in charge of any political stuff. Of course, Levine was here 2 weeks in a row, so he looks prominently like he's working this place pretty hard. I know the other candidates have been here as well, so I really haven't kept score of who's here the most. Again, I would go back to one thing I think Levine's sort of a sleeper quality of his campaign that people may be missing is just how extensive his ground game is. It's really impressive.
Well, Jacob, let me give you an opportunity to game that out. And I may be wrong about this, but I don't think I am. The only Democratic candidate I don't think who has come to the Suncoast has been Jeff Green. He was supposed to come last week. He had some plane problems. He was supposed to be here on the trapezoid.
He was supposed to talk with me that night. He canceled on a lot of us. Maybe we shouldn't bring that too hard against him, but
he's advertising with a lot of bucks on this television station.
Yeah, he sure is, and I think that's been the part of the Green campaign, is to blast the airwaves and the mailboxes. So it's not so much about flesh-to-flesh stuff. Now, I think that every other candidate has made a lot of appearances here. Levine was just here engaging with voters for quite some time over the weekend. Gillum is coming here later this week. I was at a rally at the Francis just a couple weeks ago with Gwen Graham, packed room. So I think that there's a lot of effort on the Democratic side. Certainly Adam Putnam is the lead of grassroots campaigning.
Quickly, because when you look at the Republican race, a lot of the hierarchy in the Republican Party is really kind of for Adam Putnam. Mm-hmm. On the Democratic side, can you say the same thing in terms of where are the leaders of the Democrats privately in the governor's race?
Ooh, I mean, I'm not sure there is such monolithic feeling on that side. Certainly the family connections of the Grahams, her father was governor and senator here, that has a lot of weight with a lot of the older voters. Beyond that, I don't know. There's a thin bench on the Democrats historically for the last 20 years.
We have to take a quick break, and we'll be back for final thoughts in a moment, so stay with us. And our guest joining us right now for final thoughts. So, Joe, we are a week out from the Republican primary here for governor. I mean, pick your poll in terms of what you believe in here, but do you think that there's still potential for a lot of volatility on the Republican side?
Listen, again, at the beginning of your segment, you said 90% of the voters in Sarasota and Manatee have not made up their mind yet. And I think that it's likely that people are waiting because just look at what's happened here on the local level. You don't know what's going to happen at the end of these races. I think a lot of people, traditionally Republicans, want to wait because they feel the patriotic duty of voting, so they go out and they vote on Election Day. I think that this race is open. I think DeSantis has a clear advantage at this point with the President of the United States backing him. But if there's anybody that could beat him, it's probably Adam Putnam.
Keith, it almost reminds me of a baseball season because a lot of these candidates have been out there for 2 years now, and we're down to the last 7 days and divided by just maybe a couple of points. What's going on here?
Well, I always like to think about horse races. I'm from Louisville, Kentucky, and you know, at the beginning of the race, everybody's sort of positioning. They're trying to find a lane, and they want to make that final run. Now on the Democratic side, you have a bunch of candidates who have a real shot at it, and so it's a race to the wire. And it's impossible to predict what's going to happen, so it's very exciting. One thing I will say that the Democrats have going for them is that most of the candidates like each other, their staffs like each other, and there'll be a lot of unity with whoever wins after the election.
I saw this picture in the paper today with Jeff Green and Philip Levine and poor Senator Graham in the middle. They didn't look like they were liking each other
I said most of the
too much.
candidates.
Jacob, let me ask you this. On both sides here, how much does electability play into this in terms of voters going for who they believe is the most electable and not necessarily who the president likes or who gives the most passion on the Democratic side?
I think that passion is driving voters a lot more than it did maybe a decade ago, where people seem to be doing a lot of calculus in their heads in terms of electability. But I'm not sure. I think that the truth of the matter is people have started to look at the presidential elections and realized the candidates that get the emotion going tend to win, and that sets the tone for the rest of the country.
Less than a minute, but how important is this race for presidential politics? Real quick, Joe.
Well, like I said, I think it's a +2 for 2020. Whoever controls the governor's mansion in Florida has probably a 2-point advantage.
I agree with that. It's hugely important. The presidential elections have been crazy close in Florida for a long time. This could make the difference.
Boy, that was a lot of fun. We'll talk about the Senate race next week. We want to thank our guests, Joe Gruters, the chairman of the Sarasota Republican Party, former state representative Keith Fitzgerald, and Jacob Ogles, political editor of SRQ Magazine.